scholars of this ummah, one of the great ulama of hadith, of faqih, alim of fiqh. And as a trivia question, in case you ever play Islamic Jeopardy or something, he was actually the first one assigned to compile a complete work of hadith. Yani many ulama wrote down a hadith, even in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, like Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhuma, and other Sahaba radiyallahu anhu. They wrote down hadith, like Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. During the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he wrote down a hadith. And some of the students of Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, like Munabbih and others, they wrote down a hadith as well. But this scholar particularly was assigned by the Khalifa to compile a complete work of hadith. And he then passed that responsibility after compiling his own work down to his student. And his student, his work till today is being taught and benefited from, which is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So he is the teacher of Imam Malik ibn Anas, and he was ordered by the Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is the one who ordered this scholar to write a complete work on hadith. So his name is his kunya is Abu Bakr. He's known as Abu Bakr, but his name is Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Ubaidillah ibn Abdullah ibn Shihab. And interestingly, many times he goes by Ibn Shihab as well. Ibn Abdullah, Ibn al-Harith, Ibn Zuhra, Ibn Kilab, Ibn Murrah. And those of you who know the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will notice that here he goes back to the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam onwards up with the same lineage. He was Qurashi, and he was from Quraysh, and he was from the people of Medina. So he is well known as Zuhri. Yani if you have heard of him, you will have heard of him as Zuhri. He was the teacher of many great scholars, including Imam Malik and others, but he was also the student of many of the Sahaba. Many of the ulama, they said he was born in 50 Hijri. So you can imagine he's very early on. Some ulama said 51, 58, but again, around that early time from the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he studied with Anas ibn Malik extensively. He was well known to be a student of the Sahabi Anas ibn Malik. But he narrated hadith from Sa'al ibn Sa'ad radiyallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Umar, Jabir ibn Abdullah, and he sat with and benefited from the early tabi'un. For example, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, who we spoke about earlier in this series. Abu Hatim said about him, he was the most proficient of Anas ibn Malik's students, and he named amongst them Az-Zuhri, which is him, and then Al-Qatada and others, Thabit. He said this in that rank, meaning Az-Zuhri, then Qatada, then Thabit. So he mentioned him to be from the most proficient and closest students of Anas ibn Malik. Now, what's interesting about him is, unlike many other great scholars of hadith, the likes of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and others that we'll talk about, he was not somebody who shied away from getting involved in government responsibilities. And in many of the ulama, they would shun getting involved with the government. But Az-Zuhri was, with the Umayyah, he was involved with the government. In fact, he was like an Amir of the Jaysh. He was responsible for a part of the army. Not of the entire army. In those days, the Khalifa would be the one that would lead the armies in the end. I mean, he would be the top, general in the army. But he would have smaller brigades or units, be led by certain people, and the Zuhri used to lead that. And Al-Dhahabi and others have mentioned that he was a mujahid. He would go and fight fi sabilillah. And he would also advise the umara, the leaders. He would advise them and he would be with them. And some of the scholars of hadith, they took a disdain to that. They would see him wearing the armor of the Khalifa and being with the soldiers, and they would be upset about that, because they would say, you're a person of hadith, you shouldn't get involved in these matters. But as Al-Dhahabi and Ibn Kathir and others have mentioned, that he never let his closeness to the Umayyah get in the way of his being just in his reporting of hadith. And he would at many times say things that if the Khalifa may not like, but he would stay firm on his statement. He wouldn't change it out of pressure. Imam Zuhri, there's a lot of beautiful things about his life, but I'm going to mention just a few. Entire books have been written. Darus Salam actually has a full volume book in English even about his life. So you can imagine there's a lot to cover. Abu Zinad, he says, Az-Zuhri would write everything when he sought knowledge. I saw him with his eyes, I saw him with my eyes with slates that he used to write hadith on. Now, Imam al-Zuhri, he had an amazing memory. We'll see in some of the statements later. Imam al-Zuhri said that he never heard a hadith except that he memorized it and never had to revise it. So he had an amazing memory. In fact, we'll talk about some of the ulama said that he memorized the Quran in 80 nights, the entire Quran. And some of them mentioned different numbers, but in a very short period of time, he memorized the whole Quran. So he had a very good memory. But he would still write down a hadith. And some of the students at that time, because the Arab, they used to pride themselves on their oral tradition. They used to be very good at memorizing. So when they saw somebody writing, they would think this is a weakness, as if they're unable to memorize. So some of the students of hadith that were memorizing thousands of ahadith, when they saw a Zuhri writing, they would mock him. They would tell him, like, what's wrong with you? Why are you always carrying this ink pot and the slate and always writing? Aren't you able to memorize? And if you're not, why are you sitting memorizing hadith? Like, go do something else. Az-Zuhri would say that, look, it's not that I'm not able to memorize, but I know the knowledge is protected when it's written. And he would mention some ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about preserving knowledge by writing it. And that really came to be of a great benefit, because many of those earlier scholars that only memorized ahadith, when they died, whatever they didn't teach their students died with them. Now, because ahadith are not memorized just by one person, it's not that the ahadith were lost, but that benefit was with them. But Az-Zuhri's writings continued to benefit the ummah much later. And many later scholars of hadith, like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, would say that I verified this hadith in the writing of Az-Zuhri. Not just the oral tradition, but in the written tradition as well. And now today, for example, many of us, we only rely basically on written hadith. Very few of us really sit and memorize hadith, entire books from another teacher, and then continue on. So this tradition of writing down and recording a hadith benefited the ummah in the long run. Az-Zuhri said that my knees touched the knees of Sa'id ibn Musayyib. What does that mean? The Arab would take that to mean that I studied knowledge with him for 8 years. For 8 years straight, he would study with that shaykh. And Az-Zuhri said that I moved in between Hijaz and Sham for 45 years. And I did not find a hadith that was unknown to me, nor did I narrate a hadith that I did not know. Meaning, for 45 years, he moved between Hijaz, the area of Mecca and Medina and Jeddah, this whole area, and Sham, where today Palestine, may Allah free it, and Sham, Syria, and Lebanon, and Palestine, all this area, Jordan, all of this was called Sham. So he said I would move between these two areas, because Sham had a lot of the scholars of hadith as well, and Hijaz obviously had a lot of the scholars of hadith. He said I would for 45 years, but I never found a hadith that I didn't already know, because as a person who studied in Medina, he had memorized all those ahadith. And he would never come across it except that he would know about it, so he would report it as well. So if somebody mentioned a hadith, he would complete it for them from his memory. Now, Abdullah ibn Umar, he was a Sahabi, obviously, as we know, and he was the son of Umar ibn Khattab. Az-Zuhri would narrate hadith from him. And Az-Zuhri said, I narrate a hadith to Ali ibn al-Husayn, and when I completed doing so, he said, may Allah bless you, this is how it was narrated to us. Meaning Ali ibn Husayn the son of Hussein, the son of Ali, radiallahu anhum, he would narrate hadith from Abdullah ibn Umar. And then Zuhri came, not knowing that he had already known that hadith. He narrated the hadith to Ali ibn Hussein. Ali ibn Hussein said, this is exactly how I heard it from Abdullah ibn Umar himself. Meaning how well he preserved the hadith without flipping a word, or without iqlab, or without losing any of the meaning. Sa'id ibn Ibrahim, he said about Zuhri, he did not excel us just in regards to knowledge, but if we had anything to ask, he would not waste any effort in responding to us and explaining it to us. So one thing was that he would memorize, but not just memorize. He said when we would ask him a question in fiqh on the implementation of the hadith, he was quick to be able to explain how to implement the hadith. Zuhri himself said, I've never asked a scholar to repeat what he said to me twice. Meaning, if he said something to me once, he memorized it. Abu Zinad said, we used to follow Zuhri when he would visit the scholars, and he used to carry with him a wooden slate and a paper on which he would write what he had heard. Imam Malik said about him that I've read 70 ahadith to a Zuhri, and I made an error in grammar in one of them, and he said to me, he shook his camel angrily and said, people do not understand anymore. Subhanallah. So Imam Malik, from his memory, he recites 70 ahadith with the chains. They used to recite with the sanad. And he made a single mistake from memory, and Imam Zuhri got upset, saying that people, they don't take care of knowledge anymore. Like imagine how precise the reporting of that time was. Imam Zuhri used to seek knowledge from Urwa and other than him, and then he would return home. He would wake one of his housemaids from sleep and tell her, so and so narrated such and such. She would ask, what has that got anything to do with me? And he replied, I know it has nothing to do with you. However, I heard it and wish to revise it. So if he heard something, he would go home, he would wake even a maidservant, and he would recite the hadith. Now the maidservant she's not somebody concerned about memorizing hadith. But he would tell her that I'm reciting it to you to revise it myself. And that's a very important principle. When you seek knowledge, you need to teach it as at least a revision for yourself. You know, when I used to study myself, many times we would take notes and write, but until I taught those books, I never truly comprehended them. And when I taught those books, it revised everything that I had learned. And many of the brothers that learned that knowledge, but don't then teach it, even if it's not in a masjid or a big gathering or online, even if you're just sitting with your children who may even be, toddlers, they may not understand, but it benefits you to revise that knowledge. Amr ibn Dinar said, I have not seen anyone more precise in narrating a hadith than a Zuhri. Sa'id ibn Abdul Aziz said, if knowledge came to us from a Zuhri who was in Hijaz, we would accept it, because he was outside of Hijaz. But he said, from the people of Hijaz, when knowledge came from a Zuhri, we had no doubts about it. Imam Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, a Zuhri is the best of the people in regards to hadith, and the most skilled in regards to the chains of narrations. Now there is a very interesting narration of a Zuhri when he was narrating a hadith at a time, and he was mentioning the chains. And the scholar that he was narrating it to, he told him, look, just tell me the hadith, don't give me the chain. Like, just tell me the wording of the hadith, I just want to know the hadith. He told him, if you wanted to go to the roof of a house, wouldn't you use a ladder? He said, of course. He said, then the chain is a ladder that takes you to the matan. And that was a very important thing at that time, because they didn't have books of takhrij or books of grading ahadith. So how would you know authentic from weak? Is through the chain. So he was very precise in making sure only that which is authentic is reported to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yahya ibn Sa'id said, no one from the people of knowledge had what Ibn Shihab, yani az-Zuhri, had. Ayub said, I have not met anyone more knowledgeable than az-Zuhri. Now, the very interesting aspect of Imam Zuhri that many people don't learn about is his mannerisms and his akhlaq. And I'll just mention a couple of things here. Sa'id ibn Abdul Aziz says, we would go visit a Zuhri and he would host us with many types of food. Now the people at that time, they were struggling. And many times they didn't have a lot of food, they didn't have a lot of things. So when people would come to them to learn hadith, they would tell them, meet me in the masjid, just so they would narrate the hadith and go. But Zuhri was very hospitable. When the students would come, he would not only narrate a hadith to them, but he would bring all types of different food and host them and feed them out of his love for the students of knowledge. Imam al-Dhahabi said about Zuhri, he was modest, highly respected, and even though he used to be with the people of the government of Banu Umayyah. Yani even though he had a position in the government, the people loved him because of his knowledge. Now interestingly, Imam Zuhri, when I was reading about his background, he had a stigma in his eyes. Some of the people called him Amish as well, not the famous Amish, the other, but they called him the blind. But he wasn't blind, but he had a stigma in his eyes. It was hard for him to see clearly. But he did not let that hold him back. And that's something amazing to me. In my studies, I've come across Zuhri many times. When we would do takhrij of this asanid of hadith, you would find a Zuhri in the sanad and you would look up their biographies. And many times when you learn about the Salaf al-Salihin, we hear about a Zuhri, and many great stories you will hear about his piety and his knowledge. But until today, I did not realize that he had a stigma in his eyes. And then I thought back at all of that writing of hadith and that reporting of hadith and that going out, all of that having this disability. And he never made an excuse out of it. Like today, we love to make excuses. Today, if somebody there is a dars, brother, I've got work. Brother, I've got to wash my clothes. Brother, I've got to do this. I've got to do that. We love excuses. You tell somebody, study, I'm not smart enough. Imagine if somebody has a learning disability. Khalas, they have their excuse for life. They don't need to study anything. I have a learning disability. I have ADHD. I have, I'm dyslexic. I'm this, I'm that. But these excuses do nothing for you in front of your akhirah. If you want to build your akhirah, don't let excuses get in the way. Go and try your best. And then whatever Allah gives you with, Allah will bless you for. And whatever you are unable to accomplish because of your disability, Allah will give you based on your intention and your effort. So we should never let anything hold us back from seeking knowledge. Imam al-Zuhri, Ibn Sa'id, he says that he died on the 17th of Ramadan in 124 Hijri. So if you imagine that he was born around 50 Hijri and he died in 124 Hijri, that means, alhamdulillah, he lived a long life. Throughout his life, he went through many struggles as well. At times he had great financial difficulties. And at times he was caught up in a lot of the politics that had happened, even though he was just. But because of being involved with the government, at times people tried to assassinate him and many other accusations were made against him. But you see him continuing to teach and benefit from knowledge. They said that up to the time of his death, he was teaching the people around him, and he would be narrating hadith even when there was nobody around. When they told him why, he said, because I want to revise my knowledge. Even by himself. Even at a time when he was sick and a point of death, he was dedicated to that knowledge. So we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us from those that learn a lesson from the lives of the great scholars of Islam, from the Salaf al-Salihin. And when we ascribe ourselves to them, and when we say the best of the generations are the Sahaba, as the Prophet ﷺ has told us, and then the ones after them, and then the ones after them, when we don't allow people to disrespect the Sahaba or the Salaf al-Salihin, when we look up to them, it's very important that we learn about them, that we know who they are. Their mannerisms, their hospitality, their love for knowledge, their love for the truth, their zuhud. And then we do our best to follow them in their footsteps. Not just by name, not just, okay, I'm Salafi, you throw a title on yourself. No, but are we living by it? In our aqidah, in our salah, in our manhaj, but also in our akhlaq, in our how we deal with each other, in how we dedicate ourselves to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what we learn from the great scholars of Islam. Inshallah, we hope that this will be another one of those reminders that benefits us. Wa jazakumullahu khairan. We'll take some questions until I hear that the food is ready, inshallah. So.